Anyone fascinated by the natural world has probably wondered why some animals have such strange-looking sense organs. The elephant with its huge ears. The antennae of a butterfly, which up close look like feathers. The snake with its split tongue. And what about less obvious enhancements, like the sensory cells on a crocodile's skin? Surely these evolutionary traits aren't just for decoration. In fact, the size, shape, and location of these animal sense organs is all for a purpose. And just like us, animals rely on their senses to communicate with each other, find their way around, stay safe, and most importantly, to find food. When you see how superior some animal senses are compared to those of humans, you might wonder how we ever managed to stay on top of the food chain. Animal super senses. You won't believe what's possible.
Welcome to the show that puts you in the eyes and ears, the taste buds and nerve endings of wild animals. There's a whole world and more than one spectrum of sensations that animals are aware of which just pass humans by. And yet, while it's widely known that, for example, a dog's sense of smell is dozens of times more acute than humans, or that goats have close to a 360-degree field of vision, there is a kind of sixth sense that some animals have which still defies explanation. Call it extrasensory perception. Animal abilities we can't entirely explain, but which leave us wondering and in awe. For example, take the animal response to disaster, such as the tsunami. Tragically, the tidal wave killed over 200,000 people, but the animal population was comparatively unscathed. Observers even recollect animals leaving hours before the disaster. How did they know? Can animals' extrasensory powers predict natural disasters? Do animals have a kind of extrasensory perception or sixth sense that alerts them to danger? Well, the answer is we still really don't know, but it's fascinating to speculate. And that's mostly what we'll be doing in this episode of Animal Super Senses, asking questions. The tsunami of 2004. In the hours before the tsunami hit, there are reports that at elephant camps, the large mammals were becoming agitated. They trumpeted loudly, what may have been elephantine distress calls. Many even managed to break free from their camps, presumably to head for higher ground. Just hours later, disaster. In retrospect, it seems entirely possible the elephants were responding to low-frequency rumbles that are produced when storms approach and atmospheric weather changes occur. These rumbles happen in a spectrum of sound called infrasound that is below our level of hearing, but it is one which elephants use all the time to communicate over long distances, to listen in for approaching storms, and so on. Infrasound can travel vast distances through ground, air, and water. It can be generated by wind and thunder, volcanoes, earthquakes, and huge movements of water. Scientists think that elephants feel these vibrations through their trunks or even their feet. So the next time you see an elephant with its trunk to the ground, just think it may not be sniffing the terrain, but making a trunk call. What that means, not just listening out for sound, but picking up vibrations through its trunk, which has been found contains a pressure-sensitive nerve capable of detecting seismic signals. Meanwhile, you might think, wouldn't it be great if humans had the ability to use infrasound to detect natural phenomena like hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanic activity, and tsunamis? Infrasound, low-frequency sounds, are produced by a variety of geophysical processes, but also some of the more dramatic man-made sources, aircraft and explosions, for example. In the United States, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, are currently developing highly sophisticated instruments to detect and monitor these kinds of extreme events. Naturally, those kinds of instruments all cost a small fortune to do what elephants do naturally, without even making that big of a deal about it. The production and perception of infrasound has been observed in multiple mammals, including whale, giraffe, hippo, and rhino. We can assume that some animals are influenced by environmental changes that can occur before a natural calamity. However, our understanding of such possible precursor effects and how organisms react to them is still very limited. As long as this limitation exists, the unusual behavior of animals alone cannot be used to evaluate an increased risk of earthquake or the arrival of a tsunami. But there seem to be other cues which animals tune into, far beyond the reach of the normal sensory package. If it's something in the air, then we're probably going to be way down on the species list before we sense it. When it comes to noticing shifts in barometric pressure, the sort of changes caused by a hurricane at sea, for instance, it seems birds leave us for dust. Seagulls in particular seem to know when to seek shelter from the storm. They instinctively head inland, away from the coastline, prior to the onset of inclement weather. It is believed they sense changes in the air pressure and know just when it's time to hightail it out of there. Some birds just seem to have an internal barometer about these things. Literally. Migratory birds, for example, like these white-throated sparrows. These fine feathered fellas breed in Canada and New England, but when the winter comes to call, they migrate to warmer spots in the southern and eastern United States. Their inbuilt barometer, for thus it seems to be, allows them to detect changes in air pressure. Some birds' abilities to detect an approaching storm can determine exactly when a large flock leaves for a long flight. Not only can they select the best departure time, but also the best altitude for long-distance travel. It's yet another instance where mankind has to invent and design all kinds of sensitive and expensive equipment just to match what comes naturally in the wild. Some avian species act more like weather forecasters than others do. When humans lived closer to nature, several observations were made about birds and the weather. Not all of them strictly scientific, but seeming to contain more than a seed of truth. Birds flying high in the sky are meant to be a sign of fine weather approaching. If they fly low, however, or don't fly at all, then it's believed a storm is on its way. But then on the one hand, some say birds become noisier as bad weather approaches, while on the other, there are those who will swear birds become abnormally quiet before a storm. Large groups of birds perching on power lines is said to be an indication of stormy weather. Another widely held belief is that if birds feed during the rain, it means the rain will last a long time. If they don't come out to feed, then the rain will end soon. The sixth sense for barometric pressure certainly hasn't been distributed evenly through the species. We travel now, with a certain amount of trepidation, to the shallow waters, coral reefs, and coastlines. That is the natural habitat of this sleek and deadly character. It is the blacktip shark, and it too has a similar uncanny ability to feel things, but it is not so much in the air as in the water. We all know that tropical storms develop as low-pressure systems offshore. How do sharks respond to the pressure of an approaching tropical storm? There are some interesting facts that might surprise you. In 2001, Tropical Storm Gabrielle made landfall in central Florida. Researchers had been tracking the movements of a population of juvenile blacktip sharks in a small bay there for about 3 years. Blacktip sharks were typically resident in this bay for 6 to 8 months during the summer before swimming south for the winter. The research corroborated that the blacktips typically did not leave the area until migration time, and definitely not in large groups. As Tropical Storm Gabrielle approached the coast, the researchers simply didn't have enough time to remove their array of acoustic receivers, their listening stations, from the water. They simply left them behind and hoped for the best. Fortunately, the equipment was still intact after the storm, and when researchers downloaded the data a little while later, they discovered something amazing. Not only had all the blacktip sharks they had been tracking left, but as it turned out, they had all split the scene some 7 hours before Hurricane Gabrielle hit the coast. The almost inescapable conclusion was that the sharks responded to the decrease in barometric air pressure that precedes such a big storm and made for the open seas. When it comes to storm warnings, some of the evidence for animal foresight is anecdotal at best, and sometimes even a bit murky. The most commonly repeated of these tales is that of amphibians, namely frogs and toads, who are reputed to croak louder before rainfall. Another fascinating case study is the tree frog, where it is most commonly kept as a household pet. Tree frog pets are most commonly kept in a big glass jar with a ladder running up to the lid. What the anecdotal evidence seems to suggest is that if the tree frog stays at the bottom of the jar, then rain is imminent. If, on the other hand, the little green chap climbs up the ladder, then the higher he goes, the better the weather will be. Meanwhile, back in the wild, green tree frogs are sometimes known as rain frogs. They are so named because their call is said to be the loudest at the onset of stormy weather. To find the most accurate weather forecasters on the planet, it's possible we need to get down on our knees with a magnifying glass and look into the dirt. Again, this observable phenomena still doesn't exactly come under the heading of scientific fact. But could it be that ants are the most reliable weather forecasters on Earth? Any definitive conclusions will have to wait until all the research is in. But keen observers have noted that when ants build steep mound sides to their nests, it seems to be an indication that rains are on their way. With the approach of inclement weather, ants have been witnessed carrying out extra industrious labor, working furiously, more furiously than usual, to either build and move into new nests or fix up and clean their existing nests. maybe it's only spring cleaning, but they also gather food, as if preparing for a siege, the good little soldiers that they are. But how do they know without being able to utilize some type of extrasensory perception, or insects' sixth sense? Even the most accurate scientific research still doesn't have a good answer for that. To observe another animal that has faculties which could indicate a sixth sense, you don't need a magnifying glass, or indeed to travel to some exotic corner of the world. In fact, you might not need to go any further than your own backyard. Long known as humans' best friend, different breeds of dogs have demonstrated their loyalty and courage throughout the centuries. They can also be trained as canine detectives, able to sniff out everything from narcotics to termites, concealed explosive devices, to people trapped under rubble. Smell is a dog's dominant sense. So much so that a huge part of its brain is devoted to analyzing odors. Dogs have two giant olfactory bulbs attached to the brain, which decode every smell they encounter. The bulbs weigh about 4 times as much as human olfactory bulbs. But the source of the dog's exceptional ability to smell is its wet snout. The moist, leathery surface of the snout acts like Velcro, catching even the tiniest molecules of smells, then dissolving them so that the dog's internal smell receptor cells can analyze them properly. To keep his nose wet, a dog must produce a constant supply of mucus through its nasal cavities. What is possibly less well known is their seeming extrasensory perception as medical detection dogs. Medical detection dogs are becoming increasingly popular among diabetics. Dogs seem to have an uncanny ability to alert their diabetic owners when their blood sugar levels are too low. Although odor clues seem to be the most plausible explanation, no one is entirely sure how these adorable friends can do this. The senses are the stars in supersenses, and this episode has been no exception. We have been on a fantastic voyage, led by the extrasensory perceptions some animals have, a few of which really do defy explanation. The sixth senses have taken us from the ocean depths to the jungle, the teeming life underfoot, to the migratory patterns of birds on the wing, and the incredible sense of smell of our inseparable canine friends. And these super senses will be back to fight again another day. So join us next time on Animal Super Senses.